Perfect, thank you. I'm here to talk about some of the takeaways from RDA's engagement with disciplines in the EOSC Future project and highlight some feedback relevant or of interest to the RDA community broadly. I will add a caveat, however, that this work was done as part of the EOSC Future project, which is a Horizon 2020 funded project that aims to give European researchers access to a wide web of FAIR data and related services through the implementation of the European Open Science Cloud. And that means it is very much European skewed. We are going to try and have a broader conversation that talks about global issues. And in fact, when I get into the parts where we talk about the disciplinary interviews with the domain ambassadors, we are looking broadly at what's affecting the domains without trying to put geographical boundaries around it. But I'm going to harp on the EOSC stuff for a little while longer. EOSC itself is an evolving concept of interconnected research infrastructure, services, tools, products, and resources that aims to make working with European data easier and more efficient. That is the concept. EOSC Future is involved in providing and developing this concept. The EOSC portal acts as a kind of hub for all of this, making it a valuable platform for progressing European research and promoting interdisciplinary exchange. In order to be that kind of one-stop shop, though, for all of a researcher's open science needs, it must meet the various disciplines at their level of readiness and skill in practicing open science, providing targeted supports for encouraging greater engagement and collaboration. So that's where the RDA fits in. The group that we're all presumably a part of here today represents a major international initiative to standardize and respond to research data-related challenges globally. RDA has a worldwide membership and a now 10-year track record of bringing experts together to provide concrete research data solutions for scientists, repositories, and scientific organizations. As part of the EOSC Future project, the RDA has led efforts designed to facilitate improved awareness of open science practices, services, resources that are largely available within EOSC. It ran a series of open calls which were designed to support research communities working in RDA in their endeavor to contribute to EOSC, with a particular focus on involving communities that are not yet involved in EOSC Future or in other EOSC activities. So alongside those open calls were a series of consultations with communities perceived to be underrepresented in the EOSC landscape. Some of which were highlighted in an RDA for EOSC report a couple of years ago that some of you here might be familiar with. It used a traffic light system to evaluate a handful of communities and sort of tease out which ones looked like they were not that well supported, either by policies, infrastructure, standards, or FAIR enabling tools. I'm here to talk about the key takeaways from work that has really continued on from that, specifically findings from consultative tools like user experience workshops, where we were looking for guided feedback on specifically the EOSC portal as that kind of main gateway to EOSC. Survey of the RDA community, kind of what is the conception of EOSC broadly here, how can RDA help to facilitate better European and global integration by kind of understanding how EOSC is perceived. RDA plenary meetings, we did have one that was focused on community engagement at the last RDA plenary, and at the upcoming RDA plenary, we're launching a BOF for continuing the domain ambassadors as potentially an interest group, which hopefully some of you here will be interested in contributing to. We also had interviews, one-on-ones with domain ambassadors and other grantees within EOSC Future, and actually a few other RDA representatives as well who had kind of self-identified in that survey that they were interested in talking more, providing comparative perspectives on specific communities. And yeah, it is not really readable, but it's supposed to say this workshop as well, because I use every opportunity available to talk to people and take their comments on board. Okay, so I want to talk only very briefly about the user experience sessions because basically these didn't really work out so well, but they happened and there's maybe a few interesting takeaways we can take from them. Since the goal was ultimately to widen engagement within EOSC, we decided to start with kind of a baseline of what EOSC is. How do people find it? What do they think when they encounter, again, the portal as kind of the main gateway to EOSC? What does it say about what EOSC does to the average user or to different types of users from different disciplines? We tried to differentiate our user experience sessions from an actual user testing session because the portal was actually undergoing development as we were doing these sessions. So it sort of changed between the start of the sessions and the ends of the sessions. And we weren't really focused on portal functionality as we were really kind of the idea of EOSC, teasing out what users need from this platform versus kind of teasing out what users need from what they say they want. Are there gaps that the portal platform fills? The key takeaways, as I said, were inconclusive because we didn't ultimately have that many participants and we didn't get the groupings of disciplines that we really wanted to take a look at how disciplinary perspectives might be different. But we did kind of have an overall sense of the design of the portal seems more tailored to disciplines with a high volume of data sharing already, and who therefore expect to find a wealth of data on a particular topic and need to filter based on how recent, popular, openly accessible the resources are. The service is kind of designed for people, especially with the new kind of Google search bar, for people who already know what they want. Disciplines that don't have a lot of data need to see more browse options and guidance, which are not necessarily immediately available in the portal. And so therefore it makes it a little bit more challenging to see what value the portal brings. I don't think we persuaded any of the participants in these sessions that the EOSC portal was really right for them, aside from the tools that they were already using. But interestingly, they did all seem happy to have an opportunity to talk about what EOSC is. So I am mentioning this here again because it sort of informs our approach that we took with follow-up consultations. We aimed to find out what messages had gotten through about what EOSC was, or what messages people kind of imagined that they heard. If there are certain disciplines that are not engaging with EOSC, some part of that might be because what they have internalized that it does or does not do. And the message received was really positive overall. It focused on collaboration. A lot of these themes are, the EOSC is a chance to connect and solve problems on a granular level. EOSC creates space for advocacy and knowledge sharing. EOSC is really kind of emerging from these comments as a place to reimagine how you do research, as opposed to just kind of a discovery services platform, which is functionally more of what the EOSC portal is offering at the moment. So there's an emerging picture of EOSC as a collaboration hub, which might be more of a projected desire rather than kind of the actual state of EOSC. Oh, and one more quote there. And one of the many initiatives to improve open science, which is actually kind of vague. So some of you might remember that we sent around a survey to the RDA community earlier this year in January, February. And we did ask questions about the portal. We did ask questions about your engagement with EOSC, although it was only a couple of questions. And kind of that's why we did that. That's why we were asking you about it. But then we broadened to ask questions about what tools, repositories, communities of practice, et cetera, that people in different disciplines had access to globally. We had 207 respondents and over 118 unique sub-disciplines that were captured in this report. And there were some differing trends that did kind of emerge along disciplinary lines, which would be interesting to tease out more in the future. Researchers from social sciences and humanities are likely to use general purpose tools like Zenodo, but they also utilize their institutional subscriptions or affiliations to explore other repositories and tools. They were willing to do the work of looking. Researchers in the medical and health sciences, biological sciences, and agriculture were less likely to perceive their research as cross-disciplinary, which is interesting because we think of some of those fields as being very, or at least I do. I'm coming from the arts though, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. I perceive them to be more cross-disciplinary. Researchers in natural sciences and engineering prioritize general purpose and open source, open access resources, particularly when engaging in cross-disciplinary research. So unlike the social sciences and humanities users who are really willing to dig for what they want, researchers in natural sciences and engineering, I think, are probably used to discovering what they want, and they're much more keen to support tools that are not proprietary, that don't require logins, that don't require special access permissions or extra steps to get to. Now, this comment was specific to cross-disciplinary research, so I don't know that this applies to the tools and platforms that they use that are specific to their discipline that they probably know they need to use. All right, and just some other general tidbits of information for RDA. 72 respondents indicated that they did not currently have a discipline-specific representative group within RDA, and they actually asked for one. They named group names. So, well, if you could start a group with this, if you could start a group with that, that would be great. So this list has kind of been passed or will shortly be passed along to the RDA Secretariat. Again, it's a volunteer-run organization, so really kind of the people asking for it need to be the ones to be motivated to start those groups. But it is interesting that those are groups that they wish were here. And be nice to kind of explore that and see how many others might be thinking the same thing outside of those who were surveyed. 46% of respondents, so only half of respondents, have access to discipline-specific community supports. And we were asking specifically about communities of practice outside of the RDA. So if you're not involved in RDA, is there another group you can get involved with that will teach you, fair data best practices, that will support you in your specific research endeavor? 50-50, it seems. All right, I'm just going to move along here. But I'm mindful we want to leave lots of time for conversation. We conducted, one of our consultation approaches was to conduct one-on-one interviews with the domain ambassadors, some of whom are here very kindly today to participate in a panel. We talked about needs and challenges broadly in engaging in open science. And we took that information and we turned those conversations into resources for the RDA community. Info sheets were developed based on input from the interviews, and they kind of give a picture of data sharing practices as well as tools that were mentioned in that RDA survey and tools that were vetted by some of the domain ambassadors. And then we have little blurbs that they talk about the main challenges in their disciplines. There is actually kind of an EOSC specific recommendation that is mentioned in these info sheets as well. What can EOSC do to support your discipline better? We also developed, they were already developed, but they were further developed disciplinary pages for the RDA website. They were updated. We tried to do this on a template that made it more obvious that the pages were meant to be for people who were new to the RDA, were practicing in a particular discipline and did not know where to start with all the various groups, how to get engaged. If you work in this discipline, here are some of the common ways that data is shared, and here are the groups that are talking about these issues. So click through and get into something that might be related and very relevant for you as a disciplinary researcher or research support person. The DAs developed them, and we are going to actually talk with the DAs, and we're going to talk about these info sheets shortly, because I think there needs to be a conversation about the value of this resource broadly for the RDA community as something that should be continually community managed. So the DAs have done the hard work of kind of ensuring that pages get created, and then RDA needs to ensure that they get maintained. Now, heading into our discussion today, I did pull out some high-level takeaways that I think will hopefully be interesting to consider as we think about themes and issues and challenges and solutions that the various disciplinary groups are facing. Interestingly, awareness is still a big barrier to overcome in most of the disciplines surveyed, whether or not they were perceived to be an underrepresented discipline or a discipline that had kind of low maturity in open science, or was actually a fairly mature discipline, was making progress, had developed tools. There's still this like baseline awareness hurdle to overcome. And I will admit that this projection actually seems a little bit worse than the disciplines that were evaluated 2 years ago in that report that I mentioned earlier. It probably isn't really worse. The previous report evaluated the awareness and readiness of disciplinary communities to engage in open science by looking at the development of standards, policies, guidance, roadmaps, alongside investment in infrastructures and core services, repositories, and other technical resources in the European landscape. It's very comprehensive. Through that research, it was shown that certain disciplines were taking action to support researcher engagement in open science via the European Open Science Cloud. And it was suggested that the provision of support would be a critical indicator of disciplinary uptake. Whereas in this study, information gathering focused more on researchers as users of services and infrastructures rather than producers. So to explore the potential, although there are some producers that are captured in this as well, but it is mainly looking at users, to explore the potential barriers to realizing EOSC as this kind of user-centered research commons, this community hub, this place for exchange and collaboration. As a result, the new markers of awareness may be more reflective of kind of whether higher level decision making has really yet had an impact on the ground. And if we just kind of look at, again, this chart is merging a couple of schemes that the evaluation schemes were not exactly the same. So take this with a grain of salt. If we look at awareness in relation to the previous report, we see actually a huge drop off in linguistics, which might seem a little bit frightening. But I want to point out that linguistics is not suddenly regressing or collapsing in its development of data sharing practices. But those resources maybe have not been that were noted in 2021 have not been as successfully socialized, perhaps as predicted back in 2021. It's also possible that the data provided here is informed by the personal experiences of those working in the fields. And linguistics is a heterogeneous data field with a strong culture of a strong culture of collaboration that is beginning to develop more respectful ethics protocols around the use of Indigenous language data in particular, which may be difficult to apply and might mean that there's much more difficulty in some circumstances than in others. The linguistics field is probably progressing a little bit unevenly in the uptake of open science, and that's kind of what we're seeing reflected here. Is someone is saying, well, or a couple of people are saying, in my area, actually, we have a lot of barriers to overcome yet. And we'll talk about that today because we have the linguistics interest group here, and Helene is doing double duty as an interest group chair and an RDA EOSC future ambassador. So the critical barriers that emerged in the consultations were those which prevented researchers from accessing policies and services, which kind of supports the whole, well, they have all this stuff, but they're not using it yet, evaluation. I can't think of the word I'm trying to look for, the difference between the 2021 and 2023 reports. So critical barriers are those which prevented researchers from accessing policies or services, understanding their application in particular, and articulating the value add of data sharing in practical terms for their own research. The successes were those that emerged from outreach activities, as well as developments in disciplinary methods or tools that made it easier for researchers to reuse and share their data. And if we do look at where disciplines have been successful, those successes have been around the emergence of data champions, of individuals doing the hard work of saying, this is how I organized my data and you can do it too. But the availability of fair supporting workflows and tools, more fair information, more fair resources. If you align around a particular tool set, it is easier for all those researchers using that tool set to model their research in a similar way. DMPs required for funding was mentioned a few times as something that has made a difference because people are thinking about their research as data. And the high cost of the big data projects are forcing collaboration because you just can't afford to recreate the data, which conversely emerges as a challenge for some of those smaller disciplines that it doesn't cost much to just redo your data, to recreate, reperform an experiment, or use, or to seek out information that has already been sought out by somebody else because you didn't think to go looking for what someone else had already created. Technology churn is an issue. The fact that data sharing isn't taught or isn't rewarded is also an issue. Lack of data stewardship support in some fields where there's no one to turn to when you have questions. I imagine that a lot of these challenges and successes are things that are resonating because they're probably things that you have complained about yourself before and are concerned about and perhaps want to talk a little bit more in the rest of this session. So this is my last slide, and we will move over now to, I think, a roundtable discussion with the ambassadors. But these are some prompts that came out of those challenges that I'm suggesting we might want to talk about in the discussion section later on in this workshop. These aren't things that we have to work around. I'm really curious, and I'm hoping to get out of this session what RDA can do to help with these issues. What communities can we build? How can we leverage the successful solutions in some disciplines to some of these problems and use them in other disciplines that are really struggling with them?